Hi and welcome back to Painting with Yuk-Sem. Today we're going to be painting a stallion that's going to be against a nice desert sky with a sunset. So let's get started. So I'm going to be using acrylic paint. Now as always, I just use my brush. I get it wet with a little bit of water in order to help the paint spread. So I'm going to start right in with the red. I'm going to get it on both sides of the brush and come in right at the top and get the paint across. I'm not too worried about the brush strokes, but I am making sure that I'm getting fairly good coverage. Because the top of the sky, I want it to go a bit darker, I'm just going in and dabbing my brush. I haven't washed it off, but I'm just dabbing it in a little bit of that brown. And what that'll do is it'll mix in with the red and just darken it a little bit. If you find that when you're using red or any of the bright colors actually, and you're not getting good coverage, you might want to consider getting a better quality paint, just because the more expensive paints actually have a little bit more pigment to them and a little less medium or water, depending on what they've added to it. So the paints that I tend to use have a really good opacity to it, and I can get them with some good coverage without too much problems. And then if I wanted to lighten it up, then all I do is add either some water, some medium, or a lighter color to it. So I added the orange. I haven't washed my brush because that's a really nice way to start blending, is by keeping the same colors on your brush, and just as you paint, it ends up blending them. Okay, and I'm going over the lines, especially near the top, where I want to make sure that it doesn't have a big line from one color to the next. And now I'm going to come down into the middle section. So we went from brown and red to red, orange, and now I'm going to add a little bit of the ochre. Again, I didn't wash my brush, but I am adding a bit of water. You'll see at the start it adds in a lot of that yellow, but then because the other paint is still wet, it'll pick it up and start blending it in. One of the ways to blend is that I use both sides of my brush in that X motion, and that gives me a little bit more flexibility than just going back and forth. And then I can move my brush around a little bit, and it usually gives you a nicer blending on that back. If you find that some of the paint is lifting, all you have to do is either add more paint and go back, or wait for it to dry a little bit. And then if there's a lot of slippage from the water, that paint will tend to lift off a little bit more. So now that I've gotten past the orange, now I really want to go and come into that ochre, especially down on this side here. Now that I'm going to go into the cadmium yellow, I do want to wash my brush off. So I'm going to go in, and one of the ways, especially when you're working with red and going into a lighter color, is to really press on the bottom of that water basin, or to move whatever you're using, to really move the bristles around so that you're getting the color off, because you'll see this one still will have a little bit of red in it. So I'm wiping off all the excess water. Then I can go in to the cadmium yellow and bring it in, because I want to keep a lot of that brightness there. So I'm going to start off with that yellow there. And now you see where it partially dried and it's not blending very much. Now I can come in with a little bit of the ochre and start blending that in. But then you're not trying to just go from a really dark color down into a light one all on its own. You can actually play a little bit more with the blending. As we go. So I want it to look somewhat like a sunset with maybe we'll add in a few clouds as we go. So because I'm going to work in the cadmium yellow again, the bright yellow, I'm washing off my brush. This time I'm going to add a little bit of white to it. And that's going to right into the paint. So I've got some white and some yellow, and what that's going to do is let me really blend and get some nice coverage. So a trick with the bright yellow is that if ever you're not getting coverage or you're seeing some of the other color through underneath it, all you have to do is add a little bit of white, and that'll help give you, it'll cover some of the color up. And just like that. So down at the bottom, we're going to put a mountain range and a little bit and some sand. So I'm not too worried about getting it down there. So before I wash off my brush, now I have that cadmium yellow. And where I had that ochre, the yellow here, I'm just going to come in and I lay my brush flat, and I'm just going to come in and add a few brush strokes horizontally, and that'll give the impression of having the light catching just a few clouds on the horizon here. You can tell that the sun's going to be there. I'm just going to add a little bit more white down here to where the sun would be. And then a few of those clouds that have gone there. So when you're going back into the darker color, the same thing. Now that I had some white on my brush, what I really want to do is make sure that I'm not coming in onto the red or the orange here with any white, because it'll really stand out. So again, I'm washing off the brush, making sure that it's not all the white that's there. And then I'm going to come in with a bit of water and the ochre, and just keep on bringing in some of those horizontal brush strokes, and then working my way now into some of the orange. And I'm getting coverage pretty much all across. Some areas I want them a little bit thicker, a little bit lighter. And I'm bringing some of that red, especially to the tops. If I see that I have an orange cloud, I'll just do the darker color on top, because the light will hit underneath the cloud, and so that the tops will be a little bit darker, which is where that darker color comes in. Then as I get into the red, I can now come in, and with that brown, make sure that I get just a few of those wispy clouds up at the top. And you remember, you want to balance it, is that if all of your clouds are on one side, unless the subject's going to be on the other side, you really want to try and balance so that it's even, not symmetrical where you have both sides doing exactly the same thing, but at least a little bit of, if you have some clouds here, that you have a little bit on the other side too. And that's looking about right. So you can tell I'm just bringing some of that color down, making sure that we're balancing it and we're getting some nice coverage. So what we're going to be spending quite a bit more time on today is the silhouette of the horse, because I'm going to show you how to do that with some shapes, the basic shapes. So what I'm going to start doing down here is working on a mountain range. So I'm going to get a little bit of black and then go into some of the brown, just so I have a dark shade. I'm not too worried about color, because it's going to more or less disappear into the back. You won't really notice it, but it'll just be a nice background detail. So we'll do, I guess, a flat mountain range back here. So I'm keeping my brush flat, and then as I come down, I'm just pulling it down, but what you're going to see is that the brush strokes will actually create their own kind of mountain range. You can see that the shapes get formed. So if you let your brush kind of take on a life of its own along the bumps, you'll see that you're going to get some pretty nice shapes in there without too much effort. And then as I get closer to the top, I'm just going to darken that. Every once in a while, maybe there's a little bump. And now, because this area is near the sun, so it was more brown, and let some of the yellow shine through, as it gets further away from the sun, we're going to want it to be darker. Maybe it's going to level out over here. And that's where I'm just going in with the black. And just some of your brush strokes will give that little hint of having maybe some rocks. We'll add some rocks there. Maybe here's another range. And we'll be adding a few rocks to the front of it in a bit. So now when it comes down to the sand, I'm going to go back to that brown, because here it's going to be dark, it has that black, but as we get closer to where that sun's going to hit, and I'll move the canvas forward a little bit just to get the bottom, we're going to start off with that brown and make sure that we get that shadowed area right here. And a bit of that black for the corner on this side. I'll just get that with some of the black. So I'm going to wash off my brush now, and we're going to add just a few of the highlights onto the sand, because even though it's the ground, you could do it completely silhouette, but it's also nice once in a while just to see some of the highlights of the sky that's getting picked up. Maybe on some of the moisture that's there. So I went and I got some orange and a little bit of red on my brush, and I'm just letting it mix in on its own with the paint that's already there. And this is probably about like I like it. So I'm going to wash off my big brush now, and we're going to go in with a couple of details. Remember to always wash off your brush really well. If you end up with color in there, either the next time you come to paint, it will turn out to have a little bit of red or a little bit of black where you really didn't want it, or it'll harden, and the acrylic hardens into this plastic that you really it'll take some scrubbing and some special soap to get out. So now that I have that, I'm just going to come in with one of my little detail brushes. It's a long, skinny one, and I like to use it just because it picks up some of the paint, but it doesn't leave great big lines that I have to, so it's not very wide, it's just pretty long. And I can use it horizontally. So what I've done is I've picked up some yellow, and just on the edges where I think maybe there's a couple of rocks, all I'm going to do is come in and add a couple of bumps to those areas where I think maybe there's a rock that's going to live right around there. And all I'm doing is moving my brush around, and that gives me, the brush actually takes on a little bit of life of its own and just deposits the paint wherever kind of decides, and it ends up turning out to be a lot more random than what I could do even if I tried. So I'm trying to keep whatever highlights I'm making with this brush, especially with the yellow, I'm just keeping them at the top of the rocks or on the edges of wherever the light's going to hit. Because I can come in now with a little bit of white. I didn't wash my brush off. I'm just adding a bit of white and a bit of water. And I'm going to come in and just do the same thing and let my brush kind of, I'm just wiggling it and turning it, and that helps to create that idea that, oh, well, maybe there's a little rock formation that's catching some of the light there. So wherever I had that yellow, you can come in and run a little bit of that white on there too. And I like doing it with the yellow first, just so that if there's an area that it looks a little bit odd or it's not where I wanted, at least I don't have a great big splotch of white right away, and I can play more with the yellow than really with the white. So the yellow gives me a good idea of what I want to make, what shapes are coming alive on there, and then I can come in with my other brush with some white and really get those details on there. There, something like that. And the last part is just with a detail brush, but it's not quite as long. It's just my normal small detail brush. I'm going to come in with some of that black, and at the bottom of those rocks, I'm just going to add in some shadows. So they don't have to be very precise. It's just making sure that you're getting some, if there's light that hits, then that means that it's actually going to be shading a piece of that rock as well. So to make sure that you're getting some of those nice black shadows in there. And it's just a matter of playing. You can keep on doing mountain ranges and adding shadows and crevices and rocks a little bit everywhere for a couple hours. But that'll give you a good idea of how to get the basic desert look on there. All right, so now we're going to go in and we're going to work on the shape of the horse. So what I've done is that I have my 1-inch round, it's the pointed brush, so it's rounded, and it's a fairly flexible one, and that's going to help me get that nice shape that I'm going to need. So I'm going to wet it, and the way you get a nice tip on these brushes is that when you're after you've wet it or you have paint on it, what you're going to want to do is roll it and pull towards the handle. So pull away from the tip, and that will give you a nice rounded tip, and that'll give you that really precise edge, because otherwise it can end up that you're getting this really long edge on it and it's all over the place. So you always want to be able to just wet it or get some paint on it, pull it into a nice point, and that's how you can paint with that. So the silhouette of the horse, we're going to be working in black. The tip to working in black is that it needs to be just a bit thicker than ink. So I add enough water or medium to that black to be able to have a really nice consistency where it'll spread, but not necessarily have big gobs of paint. So we're going to come up here, and the Stallion's going to be the whole way. What you really want to do is look at the shapes and the perspective of the body. So for the hip, we're going to start with the first circle, and it's better off to start smaller and add to it than to start too big and then try and make, because then you have to make your whole horse bigger because you can't make him any skinnier. So if that's going to be the hip and he's rearing up here, then we'll start with the shadow, the shoulder, with the same size circle just diagonally to it. Like I said, it's easier to go big to add than it is to make it smaller, so we'll start about that size. From those two, we're going to go onto the neck, which is, we're just going to add on that triangle to it. So we're adding on a triangle like that. And it doesn't have to have the pointy end, because right here at the tip is where we're adding that third circle for the head. Right, like that. So we have the hip, the shoulder, the neck, and then the head and the jaw. And what we're going to do is add a kidney bean shape here. So from the hip, we're going to come in and then back out around that circle. So that'll give you the shape of the back. And then from the hip here, and then down to the rib cage, and back out there. And that will give you the shape of the rib and the stomach here. We are going to do the two pieces of the bottom leg now. So the knee, we're going to have him go till about here. So that's the first piece of where the leg is, and then he's going to come down onto his hind leg here. So you have that first triangle here, back, and then down. And I'm no veterinarian or a biologist, and I cannot name you all the pieces of the horse, but I can at least get some of the joints right. All right, so from the shoulder piece here, we're going to come, his leg's going to come into the first one there, first joint, up, and then down here. Here's where the hoof is, and I'm just making, it's like a squared triangle. The same thing on this one is a triangle that's squared off just a little bit. All right, and then for the second, we can just do the same thing and maybe angle this one out just a little bit further out. So now that we have the basic shape of the body, and maybe that second leg is going to come more like that. Now we can get into the head. So the eye piece, and then this here ends up being another triangle, but that's squared off at the end. So now we can start filling him in, and you can play with the shape and make sure that you get the right muscles that you wanted with the right angles, but at least it'll give you an idea of how to start with those shapes and build it one piece at a time until you're getting a lot more of that shape that you wanted for the body. And then as you fill them in, you'll start to see what pieces you want to add on. For the nose. And the ears. And of course, for the stallion, what really sets it off now is going to be making sure that we get that mane. And that's where having a nice liquid brown with that point. So I'm rolling my brush. I'm starting near the head and running it and just lifting that brush as I get to the end, making sure that I'm getting that little wispy hair at the end. And the same thing with some of those wisps at the front. We lost his ear, so we'll make sure that that comes back. Don't be afraid to cross some of those hairs, and that's really what's going to make the difference in that stallion, to give him that wild look. Just like that. Just going to make sure that his chest here is that nice. There. And the last piece is to do the same as I did with the hair up there. It's right off the end. And start making sure that at the end of the brush stroke you lift, which will give you that nice wisp at the end. At the end of the brush stroke, right like that. I'll bring all of that together. And then as you get more used to it, and then you can get more detailed pictures of the horses or whatever animal, be it a giraffe or a dog or a moose, and just be able to do the silhouette. But it's a good way to practice getting the proportions is by doing those shapes and really being able to fill them in. And then you can work on your perspective from there. So the last little piece, just add some of the shadow underneath here. And just like that, we have the silhouette of the horse, of our stallion, and we should be able to work with that to be able to get a nice painting that we can hang up or give away for a friend. So thank you for painting with me. I hope you enjoyed it and that you get some good practice out of it. And we'll see you next time on Painting with Yuk-Sem. I'll see you then.